Well, it's really only some key issues that are, on the one hand, linked to the results immediately, but what I have had in mind is more something of what I see personally, at least, as a kind of structural change, I would say. This is the first German election I attended in a way, even if I hadn't been there when it came actually to the elections, after about 20 years. I didn't live in Germany, and in a way it is especially this contrast, what happens, or how do I see the elections, the results of the elections now, compared with what I experienced, if you want, as a young man 20 years ago. When in the meantime, of course, I followed to some extent the elections, but not in this position. The first thing I thought is really striking, that the big parties with a little bit more than 20% of the votes are extremely happy and see themselves as winners. We had been talking kind of long time ago about votes over 40 to 50%. This was always thought to be a tough vote, so-called Kopf and Kopfrennen, the little margin between the parties. Now we are talking about an extremely low level of participation and a relatively low level of the large parties in terms of the overall results. They are less than half of the votes. Now, this is the one thing, but what I think is structurally involved there, many things, but two points come to my mind in particular. The CDU, Laschet, celebrated these results actually as something we have to move forward to a modernized politics in Germany, together with the Social Democrats and others, and move forward. In actual fact, when you look at Laschet, what he actually represents is a negotiator, meaning doing the same thing as Angela Merkel, continuing this way of not having any political vision, but being very pragmatic and looking for a way of just muddling through. If Scholz has another vision, I don't know. What is characteristic is as well that the liberals, meaning the FDP and the Greens, are in the middle, building a kind of coalition, interim coalition, to finally influence the choice of the chancellor. I think this is extremely interesting, not least because the Greens had been, for a long time, not understood by themselves and by others as party of the middle. Now the liberals being back in the Bundestag, going together with the Greens in the middle. And this is characteristic that the losses are actually on the so-called extreme side, especially on the left, whereas the AfD, meaning Popular, at least doing extremely well. So this is another point. And this is linking to some extent to what you said, what does it mean for tourism? Nothing. They will move on. There is no political vision, political ambition to do anything about the politics in terms of post-colonial dependency, including tourism. Meaning there is no idea about sustainable tourism. There is no idea of really coping with the problems of value chains. So I think this will go on in the way as it did before. And I have to say, and this is something we may controversially discuss, I have to say, unfortunately, instead of retreating there, they will continue to exploit the country in the old way, which is in a way, of course, a benefit for these countries, for South Africa, if they stay with this important partner in trade. Then a final thing, and this is actually one of the parties that is not a party of the Federal Republic in a way, but it is only a party of the of Bavaria, the Christian Social Union. They are not a party on the federal level, only limited to Bavaria, but they opened the party now for people from other countries, from other lenders, from other counties. And what you can be now, of course, you cannot vote in the country if you are a member of the CSU, new member of the CSU from North Rhine-Westphalia, from Schleswig-Holstein or wherever. You cannot vote in Bavaria. You do not have actually votes for the within the party, but, and this is, I think, interesting. I read something in the Verfassungsblock, Constitutional Matters, about this. They establish a concept of followers, meaning the old concept of the concept of the old party, which in Germany have had a very strong role to play, is on the way to be withdrawn, being replaced by a kind of loose membership organization with followers, with different roles, but not with the role of being itself part of the process of political education. In a way, it would mean actually not a breach, but a deterioration of the principle that is defined in the Constitution. And I leave it there really. And in concrete terms, I think, of course, at this stage, we don't know much. It finally will depend on who is going to be chancellor. But if it is Laschet, nothing will happen. If it is Scholz, we may have a highly conflictual situation because at the end of the day, even if politics don't matter, meaning there is not a major difference in most of the questions, as I see it, but politics is as well about power, and then they will have opposition for the sake of the opposition, of being against what the other says. And this is the situation in a way that Angela Merkel had been fighting with Söder. Söder always being opposing Angela Merkel just because he wanted to have this power position. This would happen, in my opinion, possibly now in the situation between the two party leaders, because the Greens, they have had the best results since they had been standing for elections, but at the same time, it was far below what they expected. So I'll leave it with there.
Peter, colleagues, I'm just wondering, just out of curiosity, a lot of countries have been trying their best to counter the influence that China is exerting on the continent. China made really some serious inroads in terms of links and all that. And Russia, you can see, is trying to sort of also get in there, but I think it's still lagging behind. and the EU, in some respects, you still get some of that. I was just wondering, with this transition, what what is likely to happen in terms of, maybe Germany as one of the big players within the EU, would the role it may try to sort of play, countering this influence that is rising. Obviously, America is also trying to counter the Chinese influence in the continent, especially on countries such as South Africa, who are perceived as sort of the gateway to the continent, and South Africa also being a member of BRICS. So I was just curious about that. But I guess, as Peter have said, in some instances, only time will tell. One could use this example of the vaccine, the so-called vaccine apartheid, and South Africa pushing for the intellectual property, the relaxation of intellectual property rights of some of these big pharma, so that this could be produced more rapidly. That is the vaccine for the people, to be vaccinated. And it's interesting how some of the big superpowers, if I could call them that, how they've been playing on this one. Take Germany, for example. Obviously, on this vaccine thing, it would be, there is some interest there, if I could put it that way. So I think it's going to be interesting. Either would see more, action towards exerting more influence, bringing closer, the African countries, particularly South Africa, which is already represented in a number of influential fora. And also for Germany, South Africa is sort of an influential neighbor of Namibia. I read somewhere that the issue of the reparations, it was a contentious issue for many years. It looks like it's about to be settled in some way or form, if it has not yet been finalized. So I guess only time will tell. Things can get better or they can get worse, I guess.
Well, personally, I think in respect of the European Union, Germany, if you want, lost its superpower position within the Union. It had been interesting that the evening of the elections, the mood of the celebrations had been farewell to Angela Merkel. And only in the second instance, where will we go? Even if Laschet said we will move to a brighter future. Whatever one can say and has to say against Angela Merkel, she did have she did have, I think, a kind of charisma that she used in negotiations. And this charisma comes from her training as, she studied physics. And as with this background, with this academic background, you are engaging in experiments, you are doing something. The main thing is doing something forward. Very pragmatic way. And this brought her, I think, the sympathy that not least she managed well to get others doing the work she didn't want to do, even if she thought it's necessary. In terms of Europe, and Germany and European countries, then individually, there's one interesting thing showing the weakness as well of Europe. In terms of, or looking at the vaccines, there had been this struggle about the patent law. They, meaning the governments, did not engage in this issue in favor of the production and distribution, wide distribution of the vaccines. They allowed, on the contrary, the companies, the producers of it, to establish contracts with them in terms of increasing the price when it came to the second and third, the next generation, instead of saying this is a public good, and we don't accept your arguments of making more profit out of it. They said, okay, you'll get the money and we'll see how we get on. In this way, what I know, China behaved differently, and Cuba actually behaved differently, and opened, delivering themselves, being open with the patents and supporting really the wide distribution of vaccines to many other countries. To which effect, in terms of quantity, I cannot say, because I simply don't know how much really is necessary in terms and how fast it can be produced. So leaving this aside, I think this is something where there is a difference between the policies that the European Union and the member states usually blocked, and they closed the European Union. Which I think is very dangerous, and this is, I think, very dangerous as well in respect of what is happening with the Chinese influence globally. What one has to accept, in which way ever you assess this policy, what one has to assess is accept is that it is not an aggressive strategy. When I came back from China a couple of years ago, I read in the German Handelsblatt, so similar to the Financial Times, a serious newspaper on economic issues. I read something of China. Mind, China, there is a hostile takeover from China directed against Mercedes-Benz. Later, you could see in the same paper, I investigated before a little bit. Later, you could see in the same paper a little note that one individual Chinese had been buying 4% of the stock, which is ridiculous to say this is a hostile takeover by China of the entire Mercedes-Benz. I think this is something, and this is, of course, a difficulty we have we have to accept in many respects, part of globalization. The Chinese economy is a capitalist economy. And I'm talking now about the economy and what the state does with it, what the political party does with it, what it means for law is a different thing. I think there are main challenges. But what you see here is, especially with Evergrande now, Switzerland, the United States, all are complaining about Evergrande. What actually happened is the same. I'm just finishing actually writing a piece on this. It's similar to what the Lehman Brothers did. They gave away cheap money, buying into Evergrande and other developers here, and now they complain that they cannot easily pay back. So this is what happened in the United States to the small homeowners. Here you have money, you just get it, take it, but now you have to pay, and then they couldn't. And in this way, I think it is a kind of tricky thing, really, of saying that there is an expansion, politic of expansion. Having said this, there are huge amounts of money here in the country, and of course, being a capitalist country, it looks for possibilities to invest. And where do you invest? You invest where there is a potential to get some return. And if you look at it in this perspective, it is, of course, something that the investment from Chinese sides in Europe, in other parts of the world, in Africa, is something that the other way around, there are no resources, not sufficient resources in these countries. So they are basically in need of capital, in need of investment. And if I invest, I want to get something out of it, and I want to have some control of it, over it. I think this is something we cannot dispute, we cannot question. And then it goes into detail when you see that many European countries, for instance, we know Volvo is now Chinese, not because China had been taken over, because of Volvo saying we are basically establishing ourselves in China. A little detail on this. Having been stuck in Germany, I had to do some banking issues. I had to sort some banking stuff out with my Chinese bank. And because there was not, of course, no branch of my bank, I went to the Bank of China. And they said, we cannot do anything. We are a German company. So the Bank of China in Germany is a German company and not a Chinese company. Of course, it is, at the end of the day, it remains a Chinese-controlled company, but these are then details that are very interesting. And of course, difficult and challenging for law then. What does this mean when these companies are acting in two different constituencies legally?
Can I add something from a theoretical perspective more, not from a global maybe? As you know, Peter knows it well, I lived in Germany for 30 years and I observe German TV every day. And I have the feeling that this elections concerning the ideology and the discourse of human rights is it's provocative what I say now. It's a little bit manipulative. Because in this elective period, especially from the Greens, for example, there was not only an attitude to correct the so-called climate crisis worldwide, with Germany on the top, as a sort of motor country to improve the situation globally. On the other side, there were a lot of moralizing, in quotes, I say, this is only brainstorming. There were a lot of moralizing attitudes, for example, by the Greens, for example, concerning Russia. I think in Germany there is a very widespread anti-Russian, how can we say, sentiment. Sentiment, which I find moralizing. And this is for me a little bit, this has something to do with the tension. Remember in the introductory text, Peter, the collective text, we have spoken of tensions, yes, we have spoken about this, and of universalisms and particularities. I have also touched about this. And I think this is perfectly reflected in these German elections. First, as I said, this moralizing attitude. And for me, moralizing attitudes are always ideological attitudes. This is the first thing I want to say. The second thing is the elections have presented on the surface, in my opinion, a very radical change. Peter has touched upon this. CDU has been limited to 24%, and the SPD is now in 25%. The Greens are at 15%, etc. And so we will have probably a three-party coalition, probably with the Social Democrats as the leadership party. And in this change of the party landscape, I think is wrongly interpreted, in my opinion, is wrongly interpreted as a change of, as a sort of improvement of human rights issue in Germany. What I want to say is primarily the topic migration. My personal feeling is, and when I go to Germany before Corona, I went to Germany nearly every year, and I have friends and sisters. I'm connected to Germany still. Even if I'm now living 27 years in Turkey, I have these relations with Germany where I grew up. And so I think there is a wrong illusion. There is a presentation of an illusion of making things better in certain areas of life. But on the other side, the capitalist business is ongoing. There will change nothing, I would say. This is an illusion. And I think this is the danger, in quotes. This is provocative maybe. There is an illusion concerning these elections. I don't think that there will change anything in Germany. I even think that certain attitudes of, for example, let's say, structural racism, and I use this word cautiously, as you can remember maybe. I'm not someone who uses words often and easily because it's a big word, and I'm against big words. But I think structural racism will nevertheless continue, even if it seems that there are improvements. And so for me, it is a sort of, it is a real, in my opinion, a sort of manipulative election, in my opinion, concerning the tensions and the things we have spoken. And I think it is very worse, it would be valuable if I would make a comment on these things in our group. I would maybe go to these critical points. Of course, not maybe in this provocative thing because we are in our own internal group, but I would go into these topics. What really will change? Is it illusionary? Is it only moralizing? And what is the real basis of change? This is my feeling when I think of these elections, my critical feelings, I would say. And I have also spoken with a lot of, for example, the Social Democrats. They are at 25%, which is not bad if we think of the beginning of the election period. They were about 15, 16. It's a relative improvement. But like the CDU, it's a decrease if we are looking historically. And they have stolen, I would say, a lot of topics from the left. The left are about 5%. They are in the parliament, but knapp, I would say, very in the parliament, but on the limit. And we will see how the Social Democrats and how the Greens will really look how to practice, to implement the practical side of human rights concerning social issues. And I don't think that this will be realized, in fact. This is my opinion about these elections.
It is interesting, Mehmet, that
only, George, before you could, it's only a brainstorming. These are a little bit feelings which I have when I look. I have now looked to the, for example, the coalition speeches are now ongoing between Greens and the Free Democrat Party. They will be partners of the three-party coalition. And I find it's very, very, these attitudes, these artificial friendliness. I have, maybe it's only feeling which I have, but these are my first feelings concerning this.
Mehmet, never, don't excuse yourself always for brainstorming. But these politicians make storm in the water glass, as it said. They don't have any brain. So just put your opinion forward.
It's my opinion, but
and this is where I completely agree with you. There won't be any change because there is a very pragmatic approach to policy making, which brought them where they are. And there I would go a step further to say or to emphasize again what I said before. It is pragmatic policies by parties that are run down to member organizations with followers, where you have this trend to a clique democracy, and you would not have even a moral attitude. You would have just a muddling through what Merkel did for 16 years. She didn't have a political profile. She had an excellent reputation as from her profession as after studying physics, but she didn't have a profile. That the reality looked as it did was, on the one hand, result of this pragmatism, and at the same time, I was a little bit involved in the Greek disaster, was I have Mr. Schäuble, he does the dirty work for me, and I can say, but we manage. This was her approach. This was her moral, if you want. There was not only no clear vision, there was no vision. There was a vision of remaining in power. Poor girl, I don't know what she liked in this job, but anyway, that's another thing. This is, I think it's even worse than you say. There won't be change, and there is no idea of having change. And there is no losing, and this is my opinion, losing the strong role Merkel had been building up, now having two parties, equal strengths, not knowing who will be chancellor, and then one party actually after they step back then after being head of the party, and then all these quarrels that don't help to maintain a strong German position. And this will be as well something then South Africa, what you mentioned, just leave it as it is, and as long as the trade works, it's fine. Leave it to the enterprises. They do whatever they want to do. There won't be any control, and they will, on the one hand, move on exploiting the country, and at the same time move on with their extremely doubtful, questionable support policies, which ends up then of not having the vaccines, getting the vaccines there, or of not controlling enterprises in respect of the working conditions, and this would be something actually then a question to you, George. If German companies are working there, and this is of course the same for any other countries, who is responsible then, in your experience, for maintaining or for guaranteeing working conditions that are bearable?
Thanks, Peter. You see, this is where the difference is between, with all due respect, many Chinese companies and how they operate on the African continent. In accordance with our laws, labor laws, the companies that are doing business in South Africa, registered in South Africa, are bound by the labor laws. Obviously, these companies can play an important role in terms of uplifting the lives of their workers. For example, providing better pay and all that. There are challenges, for example, of given the local conditions, you'd get companies that do exploit people, definitely. And given that this is the nature of the situation with high unemployment and so on, and I think international companies, irrespective of where they come from, they can play an important role in that regard. But at the same time, also they could help shape policies. I remember there was a time when the competitiveness of some of we've got big auto industry with representation from Germany. We've got BMW in South Africa. Since their party days, we've got Mercedes in South Africa and so on. And they could say, look, South Africa is losing its competitive edge, and we are considering taking some of our business elsewhere to build elsewhere. And And we have seen, for example, there's a place it's an industrial area in Pretoria called Roslyn. We have seen that being declared a particular hub where training skills could be provided and the government getting involved, the province also getting involved to ensure that this factories remain competitive. So in a way, they could also influence policies, and ensure that we move forward. I mean, now look at South Africa. South Africa you'd expect South Africa to be a leader on electric vehicles, given its big motor manufacturing industry. But it's so slow, and sometimes you'd expect the politicians and the government to think ahead. But I think this will take the industry, international companies, to really push them towards that direction, because it's good for the environment and all that. So the other point that I want to make a link to this is that there are certain issues, especially when we talk about human rights, that in the past, I believe rights were viewed as sort of rights that would be should be upheld. Obviously, they should be upheld, protected, driven by the government. But the reality that I think is being ignored, especially in a country such as South Africa, is that advancing of rights is a multi-actor role. It might be so from interpreting the constitution and so on, but in practice, it's not treated as such. So if you stretch it also at a global level, you look at now other pressing rights, such as environmental rights. Now we're dealing with issues related to global warming. We're talking now about, environmental refugees and so on. So big industry will have to chip in, when it comes to matters such as environment and so on, but they cannot be selective, especially when they deal with emerging economies. I will tell you, a few days ago, I don't know if they're still here, there's been an envoy from, I think, the EU or from Europe that came to address the South African government to convince them to move away from dirty energy. As you will know, South Africa has large deposits of coal. Our electricity, the bulk of our electricity is from coal. I mean, we've got reserves that would last for 100 years. And now for them to say, which is correct, you stop generating your power from dirty, source such as coal, but there is no alternative. Yes, people talk about clean energy, wind, and so on. But nothing is pieced together in a way that it makes sense, to lure people, countries to South Africa from dirty energy. Even if we've got coal reserves for 100 years, we still have energy issues. So one has to look at things holistically, bringing all these rights. I'm talking about energy because it's part of the environmental rights and all that, but pursue them in such a way that they will uplift people, people's lives, from abject poverty and so on, and many other challenges that we as a country are facing. People are saying, if we stop using this dirty form of energy, what about the jobs that will be lost? There are no answers. So the point, I know I'm rambling, but the point I'm trying to make is that these really issues that are facing us today, many are built, of course, on the issue of human rights, but different types of rights that require multi-actor responsibility, including the big corporate, the big companies, and global, the global community. But now the challenge, and back to what Mehmet said, and I agree with you, Mehmet, the problem with this politics is that the more things change, is the more they stay the same. Because generally, there are certain things that are influenced by more than just politics. It's what a politician inherits. There are, at least in our part of the world, there are strong business people that wield so much influence that a politician can really campaign and come with great energies, but just to move, to move towards certain policies, then it's always met with great resistance. And I don't know how it works in Germany and maybe in Turkey, but in South Africa, there was even a constitutional case where it was fought for disclosure of who funds these political parties, because without these donors and these funders, who generally are anonymous, they cannot campaign, they cannot run their things. And once people get elected, then they push, in most instances, the objectives of these big companies that are opposed, in some instances, to fundamental rights, such as labor rights, environmental rights, if pushing those would eat into their wealth, into their profits, and so on. So this has to be looked at holistically. This is my submission. I wonder if Theo has some thoughts, or how is his internet connection holding up?
Well, just briefly on this point, I think this is crucially important at this stage, where we actually move on to a new stage of global responsibility when it comes to human rights. That the conditions, on the one hand, Adidas and Nike and whatever, whichever enterprise it is, being on the side of those who complain, but in this and that country, there is a breach of human rights. At the same time, in a way, forcing these countries to maintain these politics, sending somebody there, but don't do it, and at the same time, economically forcing them, because that is, it's a kind of paradox. They preach liberal politics, and then part of liberal politics is, of course, the law by Ricardo of the comparative advantage. And the comparative advantage is low labor, low wages, bad working conditions. And if you make use of these of the advantage, then they say, but you shouldn't do this. It's kind of do in principle, or follow in principle the liberal ideas, but if you really do so, then we complain that you do it, and it's, at least we say, it's not our fault. I have a question as well, two actually. If it works, Theo, if you could say something from the perspective of a kind of, if I'm not completely wrong, a smaller African country, and to you, Mehmet, you mentioned some positive, if I didn't get that wrong, some positive, possibly, or expected positive effect on human rights issues that I didn't understand.
No, I didn't. I said the contrary. I said that in these elections, like in all these kind of discourses, in Germany, there was a huge amount of human rights discourse and theoretical contents, outspoken. But when we are looking to the real speech of contents, or we do implement things like what George meant a little bit. So, for example, a moralizing thing was spoken about climate change and global warming. And it is true that there should be done things about this effect. But this was mentioned so moralizing in Germany. This was so mixed together. There was no speech of implementation. There was no speech how the people could not lose their jobs, which is important. Olaf Scholz did do this a little bit. So the moralizing attitude did contradict, in my opinion, with the theoretical discourse of transformation. And this is not, I would not say that we are going towards a positive tendency of human rights. On the contrary, I would say, the issue of human rights, I would say, will even become worse, not better. This is my understanding. And the election was a sort of manifestation of a sort of contradictions. When they are coming together, there will be nothing better. It will be nothing better developed, I would say. And I remember the elections of 2013. In 2013, I was member of an international election observation group. We traveled 2 weeks in Germany. There were people from Korea, from Japan, from China, from France, from Pakistan. We were people, academicians from the different countries. And in these elections of 2013, it was a little bit similar. There were moralizing things, but no speech about practical solutions. And I think in these elections, was a little bit repeated. Huh? So I can not really see how this can be implemented in social issues, for example. This is my problem with these elections. And concerning other countries, I would say Germany is a little bit continuing to behave a little bit, I would say, arrogant sometimes concerning other countries, and again moralizing. And I think the understanding that countries like Germany have the right to intervene in the affairs of other countries, even if not always militarily, but ideologically, materially, concerning the capital power behind. This is, I think, this did again come to the foreground in these elections. And I don't expect too much positive things, I would say, because Olaf Scholz has, like Merkel in 2013, Olaf Scholz has a little bit more spoken about social issues. This was, as I said, a reaction to the material unjust situation in different countries. He had to do this, but this was not something which was enough to, we can not see how things will change. I mean, they speak of global changes in these countries, but the situation in their own countries, in Germany, for example, as far as I go, even in Germany, the gap between rich and poor, this is always spoken in the talk shows. This was a main topic, the gap between rich and poor. They are now speaking about taxes, about taxation of rich people, Vermögenssteuer und so weiter, income taxation. But we will understand from the beginning that the FDP, the Free Democratic Party, party with liberal and neoliberal economic values, will prevent these things from being implemented. So I think in the practical side, concerning social justice, for example, there will change nothing. And for me, the practical side of human rights, as we have spoken for months in this group, has always something to do with concreteness. So speaking of human rights without speaking of social justice means nothing. And in this context, there will change nothing. I would say it will maybe get even worse, I would say.
But wasn't that really more, what you say, it had been a moralized issue, always tabled. I didn't see this. Was academically, there had been some debates. Mainly it was China and Russia bashing.
I mean the election. I mean
human rights.
When we and the election, I mean.
And then there was where there had been talk about inequality and stuff, but that was and I think this was something, a serious problem in a way, that it was not issued as human rights, as question of human rights, but as question of the inequality reached such a stage, such an extent that we have to do something to maintain peace within the society. Not about human rights, not about real equality. The same with climate change. It had been, you can say, moralized, I would then agree, or they agree with it, but not as a matter of human rights, but as well of something. We reached a level that it is falling back. And I assume really that people have been seriously about it, taking over in a way this fear of enough is enough. But it's not a matter of rights, but it's again, in a way, what I said about Merkel and what I said as well about the perspective, about a pragmatic approach. We have to find a solution, because otherwise we won't be able to breathe anymore.
Yes, but I haven't reflected myself correctly. I thought we have spoken about the elections, and what I meant here was where the partners in the elective process. And my critique is then again the actors concerning the election, when they debated. Yes, I would say still they did moralize things. On the other hand, academicians and social scientists, etc., they tried to bring to the foreground serious facts about injustice, for example. But the problem is that what is our problem it's my problem in our human rights group, is that this again did not come together. So we have isolated debates still in Germany. I had the feeling we have debates about problems in the framework of the elections, where the Greens, etc., did speak and debate, but the other, how can we say, the other contributions of the scientific actors, let's say, academic actors, they were not too much integrated in this electoral discourse. And this is something I would criticize. So the electoral, how can we say, the actors on the electoral framework, they could have maybe tried to include the debate about social injustice in their electoral campaign as a problem of human rights at the same time. So it's right. They said we cannot breathe if we do not change the climate, change the global warming, etc. But they did not link it to the debate of human rights, which is already ongoing concretely in the academic field. So what are we doing now in our group, I would say? Again, what are we doing in our group? Didn't we want to connect these things together? But the main actors of implementing politics are not doing this still. And this is something I would criticize in this campaign in Germany. They could have done this. So the Greens could take the contributions from the theoretical academic field, and they had the possibility to include them in their campaign. But this was not done. And I think this was missing. So the link between human rights and the social facts of societies were not brought together. This is what I meant. And this is a sort of critique, because a country like Germany, with all the knowledge accumulation, etc., all the things we know of Germany, and all the knowledge about things, about social things, this was not brought together. This is still isolated in Germany. And this is something which is a pity, I would say, because, as I said, this accumulation of knowledge in Germany, it was a little bit wasted, I would say. I mean, to say it very, very provocative, it was a little bit wasted. All this discourse about social justice as a form of human right.
Well, I would suggest, not least coming back to your question, George, from the beginning. Theo, if you can say something, have to say something, want to say something, it's more than welcome. Otherwise, I would, before we end up with 67 hours, coming to the end, with this. But this question that you mentioned is a question I think we can continue at some stage, going beyond Germany, including Barbados, and I will tell you at some stage why I say Barbados now.
My connection is still very bad. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, okay. I don't know, because my connection was very bad. I was trying to follow. So I wasn't really getting what was going on, because it was fluctuating at some point. But there was a point where I heard about the Chinese influence in Africa, and I would want to comment a bit about it, because in terms of the Chinese influence in Ghana, we are actually struggling. There is a very big city in Ghana where there is this Chinese influx. From the context of labor law, people have complained of human rights abuses. There is this issue of not getting the right in terms of payment, not going according to the national minimum wage, and all those. So there is a big issue going on, and there's this big debate going on in terms of how Ghana can regulate in terms of labor relations and also other issues with respect to social security. How Ghana can regulate some of these issues. The problem is that now China is Ghana's main trading partner. That is the main issue at the moment. And politically, there seems to be less political will in the context of trying to deal with these issues. If you look at most infrastructure development going on in Ghana, that is heavy-duty infrastructure development in the context of interchanges, big government facilities and all that. They are all being financed by the Chinese government. So at this point, we are somewhere in a fix. To what extent can we have that political will of ensuring that when Chinese people come to Ghana and they are engaging the labor services of Ghanaians, to what extent can we ensure that they meet the required standards within the framework of Ghana's labor law and also within the framework of international labor law? So that is what is happening here currently in Ghana, and the challenges that we are facing, the lack of political will and all that.
Which in a way links to what Mehmet said in terms of moralizing issues and not having a perspective, withdrawing from politics. And in a way, it links as well, I think, to this development, what I said, in terms of follower parties, which is a serious issue for policy making. And as you asked, Mehmet, I think this is part of our ambition really to cross borders, to say human rights is not limited to what was discussed in New York or in Vienna in one of the headquarters, but it is really something where, coming from different professions as well, or orientations within law, we have this kind of responsibility to cross borders there as well, and to say it's social law, labor law is part of human rights debates, or has to be part of human rights debates, and not something that is shifted away. And of course, then the most important issue, not in well, a very important issue, the question of what does it mean if nation states, national governments lose intentioned, consciously, allowingly control over things. But so I would suggest that we stop this debate here, that we have discuss this question next time as a kind of from words to actions. Les cahiers condolence, I think, was the name during the French Revolution. Then I close officially the meeting one day after the national holiday in China, in the year of celebrating 100 years the Chinese Communist Party. And one day before the 3rd of October, where the Germans, or at least some of the Germans, and definitely the German government, whichever it is and will be, celebrates what did not work out, namely German unity, and where friends of mine actually very critical towards the GDR, the former GDR, although they lived there, they said, we lost quite a lot and we did not gain any unity. Sorry to say in a way, but we have to face realities.
Yeah,
And
said but true, Peter.
Weeks again.
Okay. I was saying it's sad but true, or true but sad. Okay. But thank you very much, colleagues. Till we meet again.